At the end of June, the Chicago Teachers Union contract will expire, and there's more at stake for Chicagoans in this year's negotiations than ever before. That's saying something for a union that hasn't signed a contract without the threat of a strike since 2007. But it's true, not just because of the cost of the ask, but also because of the unprecedented power the CTU wields. Sitting across the negotiating table from them is Mayor Brandon Johnson, who was working for them until they bankrolled his campaign, along with a school board full of people he appointed. What's more, this is their first negotiation since Amendment 1, which abolished any restrictions on what public unions are allowed to bargain for. Together, that all means that Chicagoans, whether they make use of the public schools or not, have a lot riding on this contract, and the whole thing is going to happen between two parties who are very friendly to each other. So let's take a look at what that could mean for the rest of us. In a March 5th speech to the City Club of Chicago, CTU President Stacey Davis Gates said she didn't care what the contract might cost the city, even if it was, quote,
$50 billion and 3 cents.
Gates' demeanor suggests she was joking, but when analysts broke it down, they found she wasn't being quite as funny as she might have thought. Calculating a small portion of their demands came out to nearly $14 billion, and many other demands are incalculable with available data. Those expenses would be in addition to the current CPS budget of $9.4 billion a year. For reference, the whole city of Chicago is operating on a budget of $16.6 billion. So what are they asking for that could possibly cost that much? First off, their salary asks alone are unprecedented. On paper, it starts with a minimum 9% raise, but they also want other salary boosting provisions for things like seniority. The real salary increase could be as high as 55%, which would put teachers at nearly $80,000 a year above the Chicago household average. On top of which they want more staffing positions, more time off, and more benefits. But at least those demands fall under typical labor issues. Other things they want have nothing to do with working conditions. These social justice demands are only possible because of Amendment 1. For example, they want the district to go carbon neutral by 2035. They want dormitory-style housing for homeless students. Presumably without their parents, it's unclear how that would work, and cash handouts of $2,000 for every migrant student. Normally, things like this would require action from an elected legislative body. Still, other demands merely increase the union's political power. They want 25 new types of positions for their bargaining unit, along with more time off for those teachers to do union work. They also want to add certain parents to the union, again, unclear who or how. And remember in March, when the union got in trouble for taking students out of school and allegedly advising them who to vote for, one of their demands would legalize such rallies in the future. All these and many, many other demands add up to unprecedented costs for a public union contract, and Chicagoans would be on the hook for it. But what does being on the hook look like? The most tangible effect for people living in Chicago would be a massive spike in property taxes. That's the primary source of funding for public schools. If the cost of running schools increases, municipalities are obligated to raise the money to cover it, usually through property taxes. Chicago has already been plagued by unpredictable spikes in property taxes in neighborhoods like Pilsen and Humboldt Park. For many families, foreclosure is a real threat if taxes increase like this, and that's not even mentioning what it would do to the cost of rent. Chicago schools are already facing a $391 million deficit in the upcoming budget. They cannot afford this increase. The city would need to scrape together extra tax dollars from every corner where they can find it, Sheriff of Nottingham style, with the CTU as their King John. Another important consequence is that nothing in the contract addresses Chicago schools' most critical problem: poor student performance. Over the years, the more money has been poured into Chicago public schools, the worse student performance has been. Of course, that doesn't mean more money is causing the problem, but it definitely shows it isn't helping. This really exposes the union's priorities. No matter how much teachers may benefit from a contract like this, it's clear students don't. So what can you do? It's discouraging that the only say Chicagoans will have in this is through their supposed representative, Mayor Brandon Johnson, who has already done more than enough to give them buyer's remorse with approval ratings at just 29%, but there are already signs that some legislators may take action to hinder the more extreme proposals. It might be worth keeping an open line of communication with your elected officials about the demands that concern you the most. And another thing that may help, especially if you're a teacher or have friends who teach in Chicago, Chicago is to speak up respectfully. A lot of Chicago teachers are not happy with their union leadership, but it's intimidating for them to oppose the union if they think they're standing alone. Trust me, you can stand against this contract and still stand with teachers, students, and education. Finally, if you live in Chicago, call City Hall and tell them you don't feel comfortable with Mayor Johnson representing the city's interests here. Ask that he recuse himself from negotiations. His history with the union means he cannot be impartial, and that's unfair to citizens. Bottom line, the Chicago Teachers Union is the latest iteration of a political machine that's run Chicago for well over a century. This is the most important political decision happening in Chicago right now, and voters don't get a direct say in any of it. If that's not a sign that something needs to change, I don't know what is. Leave your ideas for how the city should handle negotiations in the comments below.